Amen. Luke chapter 8 is where we'll be at, Luke chapter 8. And they do a great job tonight. I think they did. And so thankful for their willingness to do so many things on teen night, and just very talented teens, and I just appreciate each and every one of them. It's a privilege to work with them and see them grow. And just as the song that they just sang, that's my heart's desire for each of them, is that they would live their life for the Lord. And we've been going through the book of James on Wednesday nights, and talks about the Christian life, and I feel like that really gives them an opportunity to equip themselves to be able to live it right, to live their life for the Lord, and I've been enjoying that study. Luke chapter 8 is where we'll be at tonight, Luke chapter 8, and we're going to look at kind of a familiar story here, a miracle of Jesus. And the second half of Luke chapter 8 is really, I think, themed, if you want to call it that. And a lot of people have dubbed it the faith-building chapter. And in 4 separate occasions in this chapter, we have 4 separate miracles that Jesus performs. And as a result of those miracles, we see increased faith in the ones that have been impacted by that. One of those is the demoniac man, which is a well-known story there, and the legion of demons inside of him. Yet Jesus Christ comes along, and no man could tame him, but Jesus could, and healed that man, and the people couldn't believe it. They're like, what in the world just happened? They tell Jesus to get out of here. But we see the increased faith of the man that was healed. And he wanted to go with Jesus and go right along with him and do the work of the Lord. But he's like, no, why don't you stay here and witness to your own people? And the woman of the blood issue, her faith was remarkable already, but I believe it was increased when she was healed just by touching the hem of Jesus' garment. And also, Jesus raises Jairus' daughter, and again, another faith-building moment for the people involved, the parents there who thought that she was dead, but she actually wasn't, and Jesus was able to raise her. This last miracle, though, is one of my favorite, and it's, I think, very familiar to most of us, and it's the miracle of Jesus calming the stormy sea. And hopefully you're there by now, Luke chapter 8, and we're going to read verses 22 through 25. It says this, "Now it came to pass on a certain day that he went into a ship with his disciples, and he said unto them, Let us go over unto the other side of the lake. And they launched forth. But as they sailed, he fell asleep. And there came down a storm of wind on the lake, and they were filled with water, and were in jeopardy. And they came to him and awoke him, saying, Master, Master, we perish. Then he arose and rebuked the wind and the raging of the water. And they ceased, and there was a calm. And he said unto them, Where is your faith? And they, being afraid, wondered, saying one to another, What manner of man is this? For he commandeth even the winds and water, and they obey him." The title of the message is, what we see in verse 25, the question Jesus asks, where is your faith? Where is your faith? And I would like us to take that question and apply that to our lives here tonight. Where is our faith? And as we walk through this amazing miracle, I think we'll be able to apply a few things to our life and be able to grow in our faith in Jesus Christ. So first of all, we're going to look at the disciples. We're going to look at a few different things here. Now, the disciples, in verse 22, it says, "Now it came to pass on a certain day that he went into a ship with his disciples. And he said unto them, Let us go over unto the other side of the lake. And they launched forth." And we know a lot about the disciples. I believe it wasn't too long ago where I know the teens talked through the disciples, and I believe the adults went through that as well. So we know a lot about the disciples. These gentlemen were a little rough around the edges, I guess you could say. They weren't well educated. Maybe not the first choice that you would pick to be on your team. But these gentlemen knew how to do a couple things. They knew how to sail and they knew how to fish. They knew those things, the ins and outs of them. They spent much time in the boat, and they knew the ins and outs of sailing. They knew the ins and outs of the Sea of Galilee as well. And I guess you could say that this was their comfort zone. And they knew what it was all about, and they knew it best. So it wasn't out of the ordinary for Jesus to say, okay, let's jump in this boat and let's go across to the other side of the lake. It wasn't a big deal. These disciples are like, sure, let's get in, let's go. It was just another day for them. And so Jesus, obviously, why not? Go take a nap. Let's go down in the bottom and let's take a nap. The disciples were trustworthy in this specific area. It wasn't out of the ordinary for them. So it would have been assumed that these disciples were more than able to meet the demand that was given. But it turned out to not be the case, not at all. And surely these disciples experienced storms out on the sea before, but this one was more than what they bargained for. It was a massive storm. They thought that they were doomed. They thought that this was the end. And they had no other option but to go down to Jesus, wake him up, and say, Master, Master, we perish. And that is basically what sums up the entire event there, the entire miracle. As we consider the question for ourselves, where is our faith? Let these disciples represent you and I tonight. I was reminded of the verse in 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 12 where it says, Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. I'm pretty sure, knowing these disciples, especially Peter, right, that they were pretty confident in themselves. The sea was quite small. It wasn't that large. I don't know if it's this thing that's being a little fussy. It wasn't quite large. The goal of the other side was only about 8 miles. That's not that far. And they've probably done it 1,000,000 times. They had this one in the bag. So let's jump in the boat. Let's head to the other side. No huge deal whatsoever. But they were wrong. They could not get through this one on their own. So is it not true that most of the time in our lives we think, I got this. It's not a huge deal. I've been through this financial trouble before. I can get through it again. I've been tempted in this area before, and I've found ways to work through it myself. I've got victory over it myself. This is not a problem for me. I can get through it. And we sometimes think that way. And I think that's the way the disciples probably thought too. Just another day. Let's go across the lake. And but you think you got this. You put your faith and confidence in yourself. And probably most of the time, we don't even consider the Lord. We don't even consider Jesus Christ when we go through those situations. Then the storms of life come, the big storms of life, and it knocks you on your feet. And it ruffles up your feathers a little bit. And you're like, well, you have no choice now. In that moment, you realize, I need to go to the Lord. I thought I was pretty confident in myself, but that was not the case. I need help. I should have considered the Lord first. Through those experiences like that, though, it's not all lost. We may increase our faith in those instances. We learn from our mistakes, and most importantly, it causes us to run to the Lord. It causes us to run to God. Something that we should have done in the first place, yes, but through that life experience, that storm, that trial, we learned something from it. We learned that we should have gone to the Lord Jesus Christ in the first place. And we are stronger because of that. We are helped because of God's strength and power. And so as we look at these storms, we may think that we can handle this, but we need to be very careful. Be very careful. Put more trust in the Lord. Where's your faith? Do you put faith in yourself? Do you think that you got this one? Or are you a person that's always got God on your mind? He must increase and I must decrease. That's your thought all throughout your entire life. And as you have that theme about you, when those storms of life come, whether it is big, whether it is small, you're automatically running to the Lord. And we want to be careful about running to things in and of ourselves. And I believe that's what the disciples did. They give us a nice picture of who they were, what they've done in this situation. Now we look at this storm. This storm, as we said, is a very powerful one. These men, they said, and we assumed that they could handle just about anything, but they couldn't handle this storm. Verse 23 says, but as they sailed, he fell asleep, and there came down a storm of wind on the lake, and they were filled with water and were in jeopardy. Have you ever experienced a storm while out on the lake before? Anybody? I personally haven't. There was one situation where I was able to go out on a fishing charter with my dad and brothers. We went out from Port Austin, went up about 5 miles out into Port Huron. And everything was really nice. It was pretty calm, you know. It looked like it was going to be a good day. And we were hoping to catch some fish. And well, the captain comes down and he says, oh, it looks like the skies are getting a little dark. I'm like, what? We looked back and sure enough, there they were. There were the clouds and they were coming in. The captain says, oh, it's not a big deal. Nothing to worry about. And he says, you just watch the waves. And if the waves start getting like a white cap, I think that's what he called it, then you know it's time to go in. And I guess it has something to do with the wind. I remember him saying that they were about 3 to 4 feet tall then. I'm like, oh, it looked pretty smooth, but whatever. So we continued on fishing. Well, it wasn't a minute later, them waves started forming, them white caps, and we're like, okay, we need to go in. And, you know, I didn't even catch my fish yet, so I was, like, pretty bummed about that. But anyways, we started heading in, and we had the lines thrown out while we were heading in, so I did eventually catch my fish. But the waves, they were rocking that boat along, and I thought I was doomed. I've never been out there before, and I would guess you could say I was a little bit terrified. It was a new experience for me. But we were fine. It wasn't a huge deal. I got out, kissed the ground, and I was totally fine. No. But that was my little experience, and it wasn't a huge deal at all. Now, but these disciples and Jesus, this was a massive storm. They were not totally fine. They were in trouble. The storms on the Sea of Galilee were a different story. The geographical location of this lake, from what I've read, gave it an opportunity for storms to just appear out of nowhere. If you've ever been there before, I believe that the whole sea is surrounded by some mountains with valleys in between, and the wind will just go right through them valleys, kind of like you're blowing through a straw, you know, a very powerful wind. And the sea could turn from a sheet of glass to a raging storm within a matter of minutes. And so, you know, you could stop there a moment and you could think, boy, temptations, storms, they can appear in my life without a moment's notice, right? They can hit you just like that. And we need to make sure that we're careful. We need to make sure that we're ready for when those storms hit our lives. We want to make sure that we're spiritually ready, that we know who we are going to run to when those storms hit. And boy, I don't know about you, but I think it would be kind of nice to know often about 3 weeks and 2 days. At this time, this is when your life's going to get a bit rocky. That'd be nice to know. And you got to prepare for it a little bit. Some of us are like, nah, I prefer not knowing. But hey, if we don't have the power to know that. God knows, but we don't. And storms can come up just like that in our lives. And they can give us a good beat down if we're not careful. And oftentimes we're usually caught off guard. But in verse 23, again, it says that there came a storm of wind on the lake, and they were filled with water and were in jeopardy. That's not the game show, by the way. This was no game, okay? They were seriously in danger. Their life was at risk. It says that their boat was filled up with water. Can you imagine that? Filled up with water? And the waves were crashing one over the other over their boat. It was a crazy scene. Turn to Matthew chapter 8. This will be the only other verse I'll have you turn to. Keep your spot there in Luke chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8, this is Matthew's account of the miracle that's taking place here. Matthew chapter 8 and verse 24. Matthew chapter 8 and verse 24. And it says, "And behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with the waves. But he was asleep." Covered. You see that word, covered? It has the idea that of covering yourself with a blanket. I mean, the ship was basically at the bottom of the ocean, it sounded like, bottom of the sea. It was literally covered with the waves. This was a massive, massive storm. The words "great tempest" really takes on a whole new meaning of this storm that they were experiencing. The words "great tempest" means shaking as in an earthquake. Yeah, this is a big storm, and it was an extremely violent storm. These storms of life that we face not only come at a moment's notice, but sometimes they seem insurmountable at times. And it seems like we are being drowned. We are being covered. We are shaking violently, and we're not sure what to do in these storms. It seems like we're losing all hope from these storms. One more thing I want to point out about this storm is back in Luke chapter 8. Turn back there with me. Hopefully you're still there. See, I did the thing that I told you to do. I did not do the thing that I told you to do, and I didn't keep my finger there. Luke chapter 8, and look again at verse 24, and it says, "And they came to him and awoke him, saying, Master, Master, we perish. Then he arose and rebuked the wind and of the raging of the water." The word "rebuked" there is the same word that Jesus used in Luke chapter 4 and also in chapter 9, when he was talking and he was rebuking the demons, okay? And so I thought that was very interesting. Is it very possible that this storm was brought on by Satan himself, trying to hinder the work of the Lord, trying to stop them dead in their tracks? See, the storms that we face in our Christian life as well are, most of the time, from Satan himself. And he's trying to cause us to stumble. He's trying to hinder us from the work that we are trying to do for the Lord. He's trying to hinder our Christian walk. You can be sure he will use just about any tactic that he can find in your life, in those storms that you face. And Satan is no one that you want to mess with. You need God's help. You need God's help. You can't face these storms on your own. This is something that you can't do. This is something that you can't handle. It doesn't matter how experienced you are. It doesn't matter how experienced of a sailor you are. This is a storm that you need desperate help for. And those storms that come up in life, yeah, a lot of the times they're something that we need God's help for. And because Satan, he sometimes has the upper hand. But when we go to the Lord, when we get strength from him, when we ask him, we can overcome. We can overcome those storms that we may face. And that leads us to our next point here, and that's Jesus Christ. So much that we can talk about when it comes to Jesus Christ, and he is the focal point of this whole miracle that takes place. He is the one that the disciples needed to rely on. We can look at the disciples, we can look at the storms, whatever, but he's the one that gets the credit. He's the one that calmed the sea. In verse 23, Jesus says, he gives us a very simple statement. I guess you could say a little command to the disciples. He says there, "Let us go over unto the side of the lake, the other side of the lake." Now, these words of Jesus were not just a command, but they were a promise as well. Not just a command, but they were a promise. A promise that the disciples failed to realize. And these words should have encouraged, they should have strengthened the disciples, but they didn't. Those words didn't. When those storms of life came, when that storm came, they forgot the words that Jesus said. You know, mark this down. When Jesus says something in his word, he's going to fulfill it. And when Jesus says that he's going to help you in any given situation, if you call upon him, you can mark that down. He's going to help you. God's word stands true. But they failed to see that. They failed to be encouraged. In the midst of that huge storm, they could have right away said, you remember what Jesus said? He said, we're going over to the other side. Who cares? We're going to make it to the other side. But they didn't. They allowed the storm of life to overwhelm them, and then they freaked out. I'm sure they tried to do things in their own hands, and then their final and last resort, let's go wake up Jesus. We're perishing. When we're perishing, it in a sense means that, hey, we're all going to be dead here. And so Jesus says, let's go ahead and go to the other side. And when he said that, you can be sure that they were going to reach the other side. But their faith was put to the test. And it turned out that their faith was very small in that situation. They didn't take Jesus at his word. After Jesus gives these words, we know that he goes down and takes a nap. It makes sense that Jesus would do so because he was a busy man. He was out doing the work of his Father. He was weary from a long day of teaching. Now, this really shows us who Jesus was. It shows us that he was 100% God and 100% man. He was able to calm the seas with just the voice, the words of his voice. But he was also tired. It shows his humanity, but it also shows who he is and how he is God. The crazy thing is that, he didn't wake up during the storm. You'd be like, you imagine that? It's like if you were going through a storm like that. These fishing vessels were not that big. They were quite small. And it's an earthquake's happening. The ship is being covered with water. It is a violent storm. You'd think that he'd wake up, but he didn't. He didn't wake up. And but what comes with that thought, I think, is a very important truth. You see, when you look at that, you'd think, okay, any normal person would have woken up from that. If you sleep anything like me, it's like somebody shuts the door. You're like, oh, what was that? Somebody here? He must have been a really good sleeper. Sometimes I wish I could sleep like that, but anyways, I can't. But you'd think he'd wake up, but, notice what woke him up. It wasn't the storm. It was the disciples. The disciples woke him up. And it was the disciples' unbelief that woke him up, that hurt him, that caused him to lose some sleep. So he didn't really care about the storm. As we saw, he got up and just with saying something. The storm was calm as could be. But it was the unbelief that the disciples had that woke him up. And oftentimes we get disturbed about things in our life that don't disturb God. And boy, what a powerful thought that is. We may experience a storm later on tonight, next week, down the road a little bit, and it really wakes us up. It really throws us down to the ground, and it beats us up. But that storm right there, it's nothing to the Lord. It's nothing. He can handle that storm. He's not disturbed by that storm. He can help you through that situation. Do you think Jesus was fully aware of what was going on while he was sleeping? Maybe he was dreaming about it. I don't know. Do you think he was fully aware? I really think he was. And I think he was fully aware of what was going on, even though he was sound asleep. First of all, he is God, right? He's omniscient. He knows what we're facing. He knows what we're dealing with. And, of course, he knew what was going on. He knows what we face all the time. He knows the ins and outs of all things. And that thought right there should give us peace as well. Even though Jesus was fast asleep in the boat, he knew what was going on. He had full control. And when we go through our storms in life, we can have that same peace, that same assurance that what's going on, Jesus is full aware of, and that he's more than able to help us out through that. A great illustration here. I found it, and I thought, boy, that fits in just perfect. doesn't fit in with what's going on around the world today. But anyways, during the darkest days of World War II, if you know anything about World War II history, there's a period of time where it was basically just Germany against England. That was a long chunk of time where it was just kind of them two going back and forth. England was standing almost alone against Hitler, and the German forces were doing everything that they could to weaken England, the island nation there of England. And then what their plan was they were going to, after they bombarded the island with their Air Force, bombs dropping, and they would move their forces in and take over the place. This actually, the bombing with the planes took place for about 57 days. Imagine that. 57 days straight. All the Germans did was they fly over and just drop bombs on primarily London, but the surrounding areas as well. And many homes were destroyed, millions and thousands of people lost their lives. But the amazing thing about the people there in England was that they still went on with their daily lives. Can you imagine that? 57 days, just bombs littering the place every day, and you just still go on with your life. And church still met, and church was still going on Sundays. The doors were open, and the British people really didn't give in to the fear during that terrible time in World War II. There was one church that was meeting, and there was an elderly saint, an elderly woman, who was asked by her pastor how she was doing. And she replied that she was sleeping soundly every night. This is during the bombing. She wasn't losing an ounce of sleep. And when asked how in the world she was able to sleep in such a terrible circumstance, she replied, "Well, I give my fears to God, and He never sleeps. I figured there's no reason for us both to stay up all night." And, I thought that was great. Yes, Jesus Christ is sleeping at the bottom of that boat. It shows His humanity. But this is God in the flesh. He never sleeps. He knows exactly what's going on in our lives today. And the battles that we may face, the things that may really concern us so severely, the future, all the things that are going on, we can rest assured that Jesus knows exactly what's going on. Jesus knows exactly what storm you are facing. And He never sleeps. He knows what you're going through. And you don't need to run in there and say, "Master, Master." Of course, we need to with that intensity at times to speak to Him. But He already knows. He already knows what we are facing. God is not concerned about the storm you are going through, but He's actually more concerned about the reaction that you have towards that storm. Will you trust Him? Will you put your faith in Him? Will you try to bring upon this storm, do it all yourself and try to get through it with your own strength? Or will you look to Him? The storms you face, as huge as it may be, is no problem to God. The disciples, unfortunately, their last resort was Jesus, their last resort. And the words that they use tell us that, "Master, Master, we perish." And in other words, we are going to die. We don't know what we're going to do. They awake Him. He gets up, and just with the sound of His voice, calms the storm. That word calm there, as we've described the storm, literally means that it was just like that, peaceful. Sometimes after the storm ceases a little bit, a real storm, you still have the rolling waves for a little bit. Not this case. It gives the idea that, just like that, sheet of glass. And wow, what a powerful thing. That God can work that same power in your life in the storms that you face as well. Where is your faith, He said. And look at the middle of verse 25, the final thing here. It says, I'll just start from the beginning, "And He said unto them, Where is your faith? And they, being afraid, wondered, saying one to another, What manner of man is this? For he commandeth even the winds and water, and they obey him. Notice there it says, and they being afraid. They had fear in that moment. When they saw what Jesus Christ just did with his voice and calming that storm, I just imagine they're like just dumbfounded, like, what just happened? I mean, I don't know. That's just what I picture. You see the intensity of this storm, and just by speaking, it's like everything's just sitting there floating along very gently. They're like, what just happened? Now, this word fear is not like, oh, they're afraid of him. What's he going to do to me now? No. We woke up Jesus. What's he going to do? No, it wasn't that. It was that they had a respect for who he was. They were inspired and awed by who he was, what he did. In other words, their faith was increased in that moment. Their faith was increased. And they respected Jesus for who he truly was in that moment. I wonder, as we close this evening, how is your faith in Jesus? How is your faith in him? If you are a living, breathing human tonight, I think we all are. Sometimes we wonder on a few. But if we all are, then we will have storms that we face. And if you're like me, and if you're a living, breathing human, you will naturally try to go through those storms yourself. And when you do, you're going to get tossed around a bit. You're going to have a rough time. Where is your faith? He must increase, and I must decrease in those situations. And as we want to strive to build our faith in him, to so rely on him in just about everything that when something does come up, when those storms just sneak up just like that, and we're caught off guard, that's the first thing we do is we go to God. We go to him in prayer because he knows what we're going through, and he's able to calm that storm with just his voice. The big storms may come. They may come now. They may come down the road. And who knows in this world that we live in today. But I wonder, where's your faith at today? Do you look to the Lord? Do you trust in him? And do you rely on him to get you through those situations? Can I encourage you to look to God? Can I encourage you to cry out to him? To put your faith in him? Because he knows exactly what you go through. And he is the one who can calm your storm. Let's pray.